Chapter 11 of the Hildar Chronicles. This chapter is called Ghosts of Otarunai River. 2 days after the Battle of Helheim, it began to rain. Heavy showers cleansed the bloody fields and castles and gave the filthy streets a welcome wash. In Vanaheim, there wasn't a soul outside, trudging down the muddy streets. Gren Elgar Castle's throne room had also remained empty since the death of King Ogni and Queen Eleonora, but that was until a cloaked man claiming to be the king's advisor had returned from war. Gunnar convinced everyone he had been captured and tortured by Muspelheim after Vanaheim's capitulation. He had somehow bravely escaped Harald's elk-hounds and brought home secrets to bring down the northern enemy. Nobody had actually seen him during the shameful defeat on Vigrid Plains, although few had the heart to care or doubt the words of this gruesomely scarred man. Beforehand, during Asmund and Hilda's absence, one man had assumed the unpleasant responsibilities of important decision-making. Sten, the stable master, had done his best to organize the grieving villagers, and had done so without taking quarters in the royal castle. But the day Gunnar found his way home, Sten mysteriously went missing. Now the grim Gunnar sat in Ogni's armchair and drank his favorite wine, seeing many moves ahead before anyone else. However, his unanticipated execution by the shore had definitely been a sour surprise for Gunnar. Notwithstanding, he had to admit being pleasantly impressed by Eleonora's trickery and would have enjoyed thanking her in his own way for her crafty stratagem. While the rain battered the castle's rooftops, Gunnar rummaged through King Ogni's trunks and cupboards. In a large leather trunk under Ogni's bed, he found a curious wooden box that was unfortunately locked. The box was finely carved, probably by Ogni himself, with delicate engravings of ferns in the foreground and a dazzling sun shining above a rushing river. Gunnar admired the late king's artistry and then coldly smashed the old box on the floor. A bundle of blue fabric wrapped in old reeds slid over towards an arrow loop slit in the northern wall. When Gunnar tried to untie the knot of reeds, it cracked into bits, puffing dust into his face. The carved box's treasure was certainly underwhelming. Only 2 small antlers, and that was all. Gunnar couldn't understand why the old fool had kept such a trophy and hidden. It must have had sentimental value, but why? Outside, A bustling crowd was building up a din of unexpected joy on such a rainy day. Gunnar wiped his torn leathery lips and dribbled saliva down his scarred chin. He called for a servant to explain what the unusual commotion was about. Through the slit, Gunnar saw someone riding on a huge fjord horse. A woman with long black hair, wearing an odd, oily feathered dress, rode into Vanaheim. Despite her strange attire and different colored hair, the villagers of Vanaheim seemed to recognize their heir to the throne, second in line. Hilda had actually sent a few Huldra sentries dressed as humans to share the news beforehand of her imminent arrival. The news spread like wildfire, and the promise of a theoretical new queen's enthronement gave them something to feel good about. Like following a schedule designed by divine providence, the rain stopped, pounding the drenched population, and the sun shone through severed clouds upon Hilda of Ogni as she dismounted from her grand horse with its satin white coat. Gunnar witnessed the spectacle from the castle's main doorway and was inclined to accept his bad fortune. He was startled by the princess's unusual composure, calm and measured, full of unspoken confidence that inspired fear and respect. She raised a hand to the crowds, and her smile was rewarded with exuberant, welcoming cries. Gunnar couldn't believe it, and hobbled as well as he could towards the young woman he had always considered like a thorn in his side, a weed he had planned to remove whenever he found the time adequate. The sycophant bowed and welcomed her, as well as his deformed vocal cords would allow him. "And you are?" said Hilda, accepting his sickly wet kiss on her hand.
"I've watched you grow up since your birth, Princess Hilda. My name is Gunnar. I was your father's advisor and personal security guard."
"You didn't do a very good job, did you?" said Hilda, accepting a soaking bouquet of wild flowers from an intimidated little boy. "I see you aren't well. Were you devoured by wolves? Or did someone scrape your body under the barnacled hull of a drakkar?" Gunnar flushed.
"Lady, I was captured."
"By our enemies from the Golden Eyrie? How unfortunate, or convenient. At least you survived the Vigrid massacre, almost in one piece. My parents would be proud to know you've been keeping Vanaheim safe, especially Eleonora." Hilda gave him a brief cold stare and swiftly changed her frightening features to please the masses. Passing the reins of her horse to Gunnar, she left him behind to climb the few steps leading up to Gran Elgar Castle. This bulky building was like a distant dream she couldn't quite recall. It somehow felt reassuring, and she imagined how interesting her childhood must have been here. But she didn't have time for that. All of a sudden, Hilda stamped her right black foot on the stone tiles and glared at the shocked crowd. Gunnar had no idea what she had in mind or what schemes she had up her sleeve. Little Hilda had always enjoyed toying with the realm's politics, but her strange charisma charming the crowds was fascinating. After a beautifully timed pause that filled the puzzled villagers with subtle fear and doubt, she softly said, "Are you proud of yourselves?" Some of the Vanaheimers squinted and exchanged frowns. "You heard me, warriors of Vanaheim? How proud are you to have been allowed to run back home with your tails between your legs after my father was beheaded?" Hilda glided down the steps towards a one-armed man, clenching his fist. She gently touched his stump bound with blood-stained leather and whispered, "Wouldn't you have preferred to lose the other and dine with the gods in Valhalla?" She raised her voice. "Why didn't you fight to the end? Are you afraid that no Valkyrie would ever choose you? Are you all a bunch of cowards who believe that Helheim and Muspelheim are better than you?" Whenever they reminisce about the glorious Battle of Helheim, they split their sides, laughing at how they treated you. When she saw a young woman snarling, Hilda switched to face her and cried, "Cowards? You aren't cowards. You were tricked into making the worst choice. Surviving a battle you should have won." A brave young lad shouted out from the back of the crowd, "Where were you when half of us were being slaughtered?" Hilda turned to where the cry had come from and blinked calmly. She pushed her way through the filthy lot and approached the anxious boy. "You were saying?" The boy before her, who had lost both parents during the war, wasn't that impressed by Hilda and dared to repeat his question. With lightning speed, Hilda drew her thin blade and swished it past the boy's ear. She held the sword over her head and said, "I was not there to follow my father's ill-advised orders, because I was held captive by the fiends of Nebelwood. But I'm here now, and I'm here to heal your wounds, the real ones, lingering in your minds and hearts. Our enemies have been at each other's throats while you've been slumbering, and both realms are now weak and desperate. Time is of the essence. Helheim's depleted troops are fighting in the north. Muspelheim is crumbling, and neither kingdom will expect the sorry losers of Vanaheim to strike them by surprise. Are you miserable, sorry losers? Don't you want to avenge your kin?" Hilda asked, staring back at the young man. "Snap out of it! Forget your hardships and shame, and follow me to Muspelheim. The gods are watching and want you to prove them wrong. Hilda's shapeshifters shouted out in rage from throughout the crowd, and gradually everyone else copied them. Gunnar was shocked, but saw a brighter future emerging. He cried out,
"Long live the Queen!"
and Hilda didn't show any sign of disapproval. Vanaheim will rise from its cinders, and we'll burn down the Golden Eyrie together. Get ready for battle. During the day, Hilda killed time by exploring the castle where she was born. Gunnar wasn't far behind. With no apparent bitterness, the young Queen of Vanaheim visited her father's quarters. Gunnar tried to distract Hilda by inviting her to join him for a celebratory bottle of mana wine, but Hilda ignored the hideous man and wandered into Agni's bedchamber. Nothing pricked her emotions or revived faint memories, and she wondered who she had become. Her cold gaze swept the floor and saw a broken wooden box. Hilda gave Gunnar a supercilious look which gave his nerves a jolt. He decided to go with honesty and admitted to being curious about what the king has chosen to hide under his bed. He said it may have been something of importance that might help the realm. And what was inside the box that could save Vanaheim from its dishonor?
Nothing at all. A simple pair of small antler buttons in a blue cloth.
Since Hilda had returned from the Howling Cauldron, she felt numb. Her life was now like wading through a dull world of grey, with little to hope for and nothing to miss. But when Gunnar placed the tiny antlers in Hilda's hands, the lethargic shell around her shattered for a brief moment. She saw Skuld floating down the stream, where she had killed Hedil's real mother, and assumed that the hunting trophy must have a deeper meaning. Hedil, are these yours? Gunnar wasn't quite sure how he could profit from the new circumstances of Hilda's return to Vanaheim, so he chose to not put an end to her short reign when she blanked out. Hilda scratched the top of her head and tossed the antler buttons aside. Gather the villagers. It is time, loyal Gunnar. We will take a shortcut to Muspelheim through the woods.
Is that wise?
Gunnar dared to ask, then immediately regretted his impulsive prudence concerning the Huldra and humbly apologized. No harm will come to my army. Nebelwood belongs to Vanaheim.
In that case,
said Gunnar, bowing to the queen and hurrying away to his torture chambers to smear his body in charcoal paste. Kyoko cried blinding white disk at the top of Mooncastle Well, but no one could hear her. In the dark, her two companions of misfortune moaned underwater, while no air bubbled out of their mouths. The circular stone brick walls had a familiar turquoise flicker to them. Kyoko's hands shimmered, and her damaged nails swayed like weeds in a gentle river flow. Despite a strange sensation of being weightless, Kyoko couldn't climb any higher. But she realized she hadn't been climbing at all and wasn't even touching the damp walls. Kyoko rolled over and saw the pool of oil below, where the two Helheimers had fought a lost battle and drowned together. Their globulous green eyes stared upwards at her like bioluminescent fish, and Kyoko finally understood what had occurred. Now I am one of you at last. Her troubles were over. Kyoko fled the light and dropped into the waters, squirming with ghosts. Many autumns ago, in the land of the Ainu people, the rice harvest was almost finished. Although Otarunai was known as being a fishing village, at this time of the year the population was primarily dedicated to farming, and everyone helped out in the paddy fields. The summer had been exceptionally hot for this coastal region on an island where winters were harsh and summers mildly warm. The rice crops had suffered, and the most villagers were on edge because it was common knowledge that their survival was intrinsically linked to the rice production. The cool temperature in early autumn was a welcome compensation for the hard work. Kyoko helped her grandmother in the fields, hopping around the rice plants with such light-hearted enthusiasm that her carefree attitude seemed to annoy the other farmers. With their sweaty bent backs and ragged wicker hats, the concerned rice farmers huffed and grunted as she ran along with her short hair swishing around her neck. The young 6-year-old's main job was to carefully brush the grains with a stick to remove clinging water drops. And then her Oba-chan would use a sickle to cut the rice. Others tied the rice in bundles using dried long leaves, and Kyoko would carry a few over to her parents, busy hanging the rice out to dry on wooden racks. Her father, Oki, tossed the many bundles up to Kyoko's mother, Fusa, standing at the top of the ladder. Neither looked happy, but Kyoko didn't seem to notice. She ran back to her grandmother, Pokusa, waiting for Kyoko to tap the grains. A couple of middle-aged men snickered as they walked past Pokusa, holding their noses. Kyoko couldn't understand how her Oba-chan put up with her childish jokes related to her name. After all, the Bakusa wild plant perhaps was a smelly plant, but a popular one. Its garlic flavor always enriched a boring dish, and Kyoko told the two men as much, pointing out that her grandmother was not the one who stank of monkey feces. Kyoko had never been so rudely forthcoming, and Bakusa begged for the men's forgiveness. The smaller of the two men turned round and stroked his black beard. His nose was slightly bent, and his dark skin was as wrinkled as a ploughed field. He spat onto the floor and made a scene, insulting Bakusa and her granddaughter. Kyoko stamped her foot. The young girl didn't stop and told the walking cesspits to go fishing, and that even rotten yellowtail fish would be more pleasant than their disgusting stink. Bakusa gulped in horror. Kyoko's parents were too far to notice the kerfuffle and kept on hanging up rice bundles. The taller man with bird-like features and baldness on the top of his oily head pointed his sickle menacingly at Bakusa, yelling at her to keep her ugly macaque in order. Kyoko didn't often take this sort of insult to heart, because her parents had told her that jealousy made people mean. Some would despise her for her fine features. Some would try to take advantage of her. Nevertheless, when the shorter man kicked dirt into Bakusa's face as she grovelled before them, Kyoko shrieked and threw her stick at him. From the top of her ladder, Fusa heard her daughter scream. Both parents dropped what they were doing and ran towards the rice cutters on the other side of the field. Bakusa was sobbing, and the bearded man named Pony held his left eye with a bloody rag. She ran away. Sabo is chasing her, whimpered Bakusa, Fusa's mother.
Which way?
Shouted Oki. Fusa stayed behind to fish for information, then quickly followed her husband, leaving the one-eyed farmer and her whining mother behind. Red-faced macaques on Ezo spruce branches interrupted their mutual fur cleaning to observe humans running along a woodland path below. They snarled and flashed their sharp teeth, swinging down to lower boughs. Kyoko rushed up the hill, cutting her arms and legs on the overgrown long grass, and only heard the red-faced man screaming and panting behind her. After a long hour's chase up the mountainside, Sabo caught his breath at the summit and leaned against a dead conifer tree on a stone ledge. He called out to Kyoko with attractive terms such as ugly runt or vile vixen, but to no effect. Kyoko hid inside an unoccupied fox den and heard Sabo's muffled voice trying to lure her out.
It's all right, Kyoko-chan. I forgive you. I know you didn't mean to puncture Pony's eye or bite my finger off,
growled Zappo, scraping his sickle on volcanic rocks, searching for Kyoko near a cliff's edge.
Let me bring you home to your parents. They must be worried sick.
He peered over the edge and knew she couldn't have gone that way. All villagers knew this infamous spot. When food was scarce and winter was near, an untold rule led many families to sacrifice the elderly in order to save the young. A senior relative would be invited to jump off these very same cliffs where Zappo had already stood when he pushed his father to his death. Some old-timers wouldn't always be so cooperative, like Zappo's Otasan, and they would have to be tied up and silenced before carrying them to the sacrificial grounds. Some didn't even bother to carry their unloved relatives to the top of the mountain and dumped them near an Ezo wolf den or into a river leading out to sea. Whatever the outcome, most farmers had this on their minds during the harvest season, and this year's results were going to be depressing. Zappo heard Oki and Fusa running up the steep path, crying their daughter's name, and he faced them with his sickle. They saw him near the edge and assumed the worst. "What have you done to our daughter?" cried Fusa, running towards Zappo to look down at the rocks below. "You pushed her, didn't you? Like your poor father." "You did it!" screamed Fusa, trying to scratch Zappo's eyes out.
I see why the ugly runt behaves so badly,
laughed Zappo, grabbing Fusa's arms, causing him to drop the sickle that clattered down into the valley.
Look what you made me do, Shikusho,
he bellowed, slapping her hard. Oki told him to let go of his wife, but Zappo threatened to toss Fusa over the edge. Oki knew he wasn't bluffing. Regardless, he slowly closed in on the tall farmer. When Oki was within a rake's distance, Zappo pretended to throw Fusa to her doom, and Oki dashed forwards. Instead of dropping Fusa, Zappo flung her backwards to the ground, and Oki tumbled over his wife and fell off the cliff. Kyoko's mother hardly noticed her husband's death. She wept in silence, convinced her only daughter was dead. When Zappo grabbed her by the hair, exposing his ghastly black and yellow broken teeth with a surly smile, Fusa pounced at his neck and bit out his thyroid cartilage. The two farmers fell and cracked their bones on the bloody rocks below. The moon shone brightly that night. Foxes barked in the distance, and cicada choirs swarmed the forest. Kyoko heard her parents call her name, and she emerged from her hiding place. They were standing under a pale blue willow tree, holding hands. "Ryashin," she cried, tears rolling down her cheeks. Both parents held out their hands and told their daughter to stop. Fusa said, "Musume, you need to run home. Uchi is waiting for you. We need to rest here for a while." All is back to normal, added Oki. "Wipe your tears, my little lotus flower, and run to Pukusa. She has your favorite soup on the fire. Hurry up." Kyoko wanted to ask why they didn't come with her, but they vanished into the shadows of the wood. A few weeks later, when Kyoko's parents and Sapo were still missing and hadn't returned, Kyoko went searching by herself along Oterunai River that slithered along the valley near the mountain where she had fled. Through pine branches, she saw a couple of foxes drinking from the river. They must have caught her scent in the morning breeze and suddenly scampered off along the pebbled shore. Kyoko adjusted her dress and decided to follow the two foxes. She spotted them upriver, skipping over smooth rocks with natural grace, and hurried forwards, ignoring the yellow-striped spiders and huge webs blocking her way, and sleepy black snakes resting on warm stones. When she arrived near a waterfall and a wide cave entrance where she sometimes played, she felt an ominous foreboding. The villagers forbid their children to venture any further than this specific location for their own safety. Wolves were said to live further upstream. Bandits camped there too, and the ghosts of their victims haunted the entire valley. Kyoko drank from the fresh water dripping from the cave ceiling and felt a chill run down her spine. Fox barks echoed in the cave, and Kyoko bravely followed the sounds. The river was more of a stream now, and jagged rocks gradually replaced the lush foliage in the ravine. Kyoko looked up at the cliffs looming above her and recognized the ledge to where Sapo had chased her. Such a horrid man, and that big pony serves him right. Pony had asked for retribution for his lost eye and demanded half of Kyoko's family's share of rice. Without Oki or Fusa to back her up, Pokusa didn't know how she could refuse, especially with 2 adults less to feed. Climbing over cracked rocks on all fours, Kyoko swore she saw the foxes skip in front of her and jump over a large boulder. She skirted the obstacle, eager to catch another glimpse of the wonderful creatures, and came face to face with the rotting corpses of her parents and Sapo. flesh had mostly been eaten away by scavengers, and insects of all kinds bustled over their bodies. A large hornet shot out of one of her mother's eye sockets, and Kyoko screamed. Oki and Fusa floated beside their lost physical shells and helplessly watched their poor child run away in tears. One day she'll return, said Oki to his dead wife. Show her where the sickle lies, and she'll cut your hair. Kyoko woke from her distant childhood memories. Agitated souls were clinging to her legs as she sank further into the Helheim well's cold water. Others watched her with crazy lidless eyes while they floated in the dark. A weak current dragged Kyoko downwards until she arrived in front of a fence of rusty bars. She swam through and followed the flow. Akka, Happo, are you there? She whispered into the darkness. Uchi, Fukusa. Suddenly, Kyoko was back home in Otarunai. She was young again, standing in her grandmother's paddy field. The rice shoots were only just sticking their heads out of the water, so it must have been springtime. It was late, and the farmers must have been in their huts. Kyoko saw a dozen macaques playing near a neighbor's field. She forgot about all her past troubles and strolled over to see what the little rascals were up to. She never thought she'd miss these red-faced devils. The macaques were squabbling over the carrion they had found. Kyoko's grandmother lay prostrate in the mud on the outskirts of the macaques' woodland habitat. They would sometimes wander into the villages, pinch food and filch fruit from trees, but they were rarely aggressive towards humans. They were never known to attack anyone, let alone kill someone. Kyoko had an awful sense of deja vu. She screamed at the scavengers, waving her arms erratically, and most of the macaques fled in all directions. 2 males defied the young woman, but Kyoko gave them a vicious kick that probably broke one of their arms. Fukusa was dead, eaten by macaques, but her throat had been slit. Macaques didn't wield swords or knives. Kyoko erased from her mind the foul face of Pony, whom she suspected to be Bokusa's murderer, and closed her eyes tight. She didn't want to relive this tragedy again. The 5th hidden well flushed her out of the place where she wanted to be most, and dropped her into the center of Odin's eye. Kyoko pushed entangled lily pads out of the way and managed to climb out of the old well. Trees didn't have a turquoise tinkle. The moon wasn't trembling with sapphire energy. Kyoko felt sick. She was tired, wet, hungry, and cold. But she wasn't dead. While Vanaheim's terrified army marched through the gloom of Nebelwood, Helheim was fighting Muspelheim at the gates of the Golden Eyrie. Drogs invited themselves to the battle and slaughtered as many men and women as they could without discrimination. When Gunnar arrived with his improvised plan of attack and wary soldiers, he wasn't shocked to see that Hilda had decided to wait in the woods on her great horse. She waved to him and pointed towards the castle, then galloped back into the heart of the forest. He assessed the situation. Vanaheim's enemies were effectively weakened. Even if the two opponents fought together against his warriors, they wouldn't stand a chance. And yet, an unexpected third party was there too. Drogs fighting humans in broad daylight. Gunnar reached inside his coat for a pouch of black paste to smear his face with, but it was missing. If he was going to survive Hilda's reign, he would have to prove himself in this battle first. There was no turning back.
For King Ogni, for Vanaheim,
cried Gunnar, drawing his sword and leading the way. Archers lit their arrows and didn't aim for their enemies, fighting off horrific grey creatures. They let their torches fly over the bed and crack into the wooden structure of the Golden Eyrie. Harald saw his worst fears come true and watched the arched bridge of fire sailing over his dying men and women. The Golden Eyrie was easily set ablaze and soon became the largest beacon anyone had ever seen. Harald nearly cried, then laughed before a Vanaheim warrior on horseback plunged a lance into his chest. Kara lost herself in the rage of battle. She swept through the crowds, tearing through arteries, puncturing bellies, skewering eardrums. Nothing could stop her until a familiar, distasteful stench triggered her memory. He was here. Kara walked carelessly through the ballet of blood and guts as if blessed with a shield of invincibility. Gunnar was up ahead, pummeling one of her own who had switched back to human form. She accelerated and grabbed her torturer by the scruff of the neck and dragged him away into the woods. When Kara dumped him on the mossy floor, Gunnar swung round with a dagger and sprang at the Droog. She disarmed him with ease, cutting off his hands with one swipe. Gunnar didn't wail like the other victims. He had changed. His leathery skin was almost putrefied, giving him a cadaverous appearance. His wound didn't spray out much blood, and Gunnar didn't appear to be in much pain. He simply gazed at Kara, probably trying to remember which victim she could be. Surely you know who I am.
Not many escape. You're right, little fox,
replied Gunnar, tending to his wrist. Are you trying to dress up as one of us? Said Kara, scraping off some charcoal from Gunnar's arm, leaving a deep cut.
I never thought of that.
He replied with a laugh.
Perhaps you should ask your leader over there, the one with an axe in his skull, if my disguise was worth it.
Kara knew that Gunnar had another concealed weapon in his other hand, but couldn't resist, checking to see if he was lying or not. She turned to the battle, and Gunnar threw a flask of poison at her. The bottle flew through the air and cracked on a mossy rock. It liberated a pungent gas that made a few surrounding poppies shrivel. Gunnar gasped when Kara suddenly appeared behind him with dagger claws pressing his throat. He coughed and uttered,
I didn't know you could move so fast. Something to add to my list of...
Kara screamed like a demon and ripped Gunnar's neck with all her strength. She'd made him pay, but she didn't feel any better. She watched the men and Huldra slaughtering each other before the gigantic bonfire. The castle was like the sun. She could feel its warmth, the power of its deadly tongues. The silhouettes of dying friends and foe blended together like firewood. They were being punished, all living beings alike. Perhaps we deserve to die.
Me all too, eventually,
replied Gunnar's pale head on the mossy ground, while his body ran the sword through Kara's heart. A surreptitious mist had slithered into the woods and over the battlefield, and all the fallen soldiers were already returning to life for yet another chance of defeating their enemies. Gunnar knew how lucky he had been to mislay his black paste bottle. It was amusing and utterly frustrating how some things were always out of his control. He would have to put an end to that. Black clouds filled the sky over Vigrid Plains. Kyoko still felt a slight pain in her abdomen and had already emptied the contents of her stomach several times. She wiped the bile from her lips and walked back to Helheim, focusing on every step so she didn't collapse. The white walls were right ahead, and she could hear no signs of warfare. A few more steps, and she would be home. When Kyoko did finally collapse, someone who had been spying on her picked her up and flopped her onto a horse. Once more, Edil and Kyoko were together again, riding back to Moon Castle. The Golden Eyrie was nothing but clouds of black smoke and rubble. Asmund was caught between the Muspelheimers, his former enemies of Helheim, the nightmarish Drogar, and an army of old friends and acquaintances from Vanaheim who were out to kill him. He had returned from the dead so many times, he felt closer to a corpse than a living being. He had to flee the battle. Kyoko must need him. Helheim would never win this endless war. They had to retreat. And they did. But the Drogs kept on tormenting them, although many beasts have been cut to pieces as well. The Muspelheimers played dead and stayed behind. Vanaheim's troops felt a sense of desperation and had an inkling that they were on the brink of victory. Whatever the casualties, whatever the price of constantly beating death, the gods must be on their side. Valkyries were testing their strength and perseverance. They had to keep it up. Halfway to Helheim, most Drogs and Norsemen were too exhausted to remember what they were doing in Moonstone Hills. Days had passed. The mist followed them wherever they roamed, and neither extreme brutality nor swift murder could grant anyone the final relief of eternal slumber. And then the mist receded and didn't return. Vanaheim's army wandered off to Granelger with a puzzled Gunnar leading the way. The people of Helheim staggered home, and the Drogar fled to the western mountains. Hilda watched everything through the blue flames and felt boiling phloem pounding through the great ash tree. Then she saw Kyoko in Edil's arms on a beach. He was kissing her. She summoned Sune to Orphan Webs, and Freyr accompanied the troubled woman to the place where he had saved her a lifetime ago. Hilda waited for Sune to climb the steps leading to the trapdoor that she had just opened, and jumped into the pit of darkness. Sune followed her. Sticky spider webs broke her fall. This ash tree root was filled with cobwebs that completely masked the surrounding walls, if there were any. Hilda squirmed as she pulled herself out of the cradle of webs. She rubbed herself all over and wiped her hands on Sune's back. "Are you ready?" he asked. "Are you, son of Voluspa? By the way, you can tell me now, where is your mother?" "You know that I don't know. Do you think I would have helped you otherwise?" "That's not very kind, Susu. Well, anyhow, let's not waste time. Are you going to stab me now? Or when my feet touch the black water? Sunni stared at the inky surface of an octagonal pool without any visible frame around it. He didn't know what to do. You could still try to knife me in the back and push me in the well, like you did in the Howling Cauldron. I'm not a very strong woman. You could easily overpower me with your Drogar energy. Freyr interrupted the sour goodbyes and landed on the trampoline of webs behind them. He didn't struggle as much as Hilda and set himself free without a sweat. Hilda fathomed his mind, but the faithful beast remained quiet. I'm touched, Freya, unless you've come to offer an optional head for the ride. Friend or foe, said Sunni, we are neither. Dear Freyr was once a Huldra spy. I think that counts as a foe. He's also been as helpful and loyal as any friend could ever dream of. So that would also make him a friend. As for you, Susu, if we take a look back in time, you were also a friend of mine. We now work for the same purpose, the well-being of the giant ash tree. So I can't really call you an enemy. Although you have tried to kill me a few times, haven't you? Only once, Hilda. I like honesty. It can really take you places, said Hilda, dipping her fingers in the dark water while Freya seized Sunni's arms. She tasted the oily liquid, and it stained her teeth black. It's actually not bad. It has a sap-like quality to it. An old fermented sap that hasn't been touched for generations. Sunni struggled and growled, but wasn't able to transform into a drog. All that training to control the deadly monster inside you, and when you really need it, you can't get the fire going. How your mother would be ashamed of you. Thank you, Sunni, for all you have done. I won't ever forget you. I mean it, she said, revealing a hatchet from inside her dress. She gave Sunni's neck a whack, then chopped away to get through to his spine. Getting tired and bloody, Hilda took a deep breath and mustered all her strength to deliver one powerful blow. Sunni gurgled and moaned, and then all his pain vanished in one elegant swipe.
I could have done it for you in one go,
said Freya, with no concealed rebuke. Then you would have had to do this, said Hilda, plucking out the left eye with 2 fingers and cutting the bloody optic nerve with her hatchet. She grimaced, but didn't let out a single cry. Hold on to this for me, would you? Actually, I think I'd rather have you eat it, so I can keep an eye on you. Do it. Freya was horrified, but did as she commanded, and gulped the eyeball down his large throat. Hilda took one step into the oily water and fell straight downwards, splashing Freya with dark, indelible patches. He waited for the ripples to cease, then carried Sune's body out of a one-way door. Maybe the swans could help. On the seashore south of Moon Castle, Hedil walked with Kyoko, who was feeling much better after a warm meal and a few good nights' sleep. The salty breeze was refreshing and reminded her of happier days, waiting for the fishermen on the beaches of Otarunai, spotting different types of birds, or guessing whether fins belonged to sharks or porpoises. They both chatted freely, without the weight of the three realms over their heads, and Hedil found it therapeutic. Talking to someone who knew what he was and didn't judge him for it was comforting and relaxing. He felt he could control his urges and submerge his doubts when by her side. Kyoko winced as a gust of wind blew sand into her eyes. Hedil told her to keep still and protected her by blocking the wind with his body. He placed a hand over one side of her head while trying to pick out the grains of sand with his little finger. Kyoko felt herself melting inside, but simply stared into Hedil's blue eyes with friendly gratitude. Terns flew against the wind and appeared to be hovering above them. The two friends walked back to the castle and saw that most of Helheim's villagers had come home. Were things going to calm down at last? Water will always take the form of the vase it fills. This is the end of part 1, so see you next time for chapter 12 in the second part of the Hildar Chronicle.